Hi, welcome to episode 533 of The Corner of Knit and Tea. My name is Laura. I'm also known as Fluffy Kira on Instagram and Blue Sky. I blog over at thecornerofknitandtea.com, which is where this episode and every episode show notes will be. And I have an Etsy shop called The Corner of Knit and Tea where I sell my handspun yarn and knitting patterns. Hi, how are you? I hope that you are doing well. It is Monday, August 18th. The month is flying by. It is summer. It is hot. And I am starting to feel the siren call of fall knitting. I hope that you're doing well, that you've had a good weekend. I had a pretty good and pretty productive weekend. There has been a decent amount of crafting this week, so I have some things to show you. I have some things I can't show you or didn't bring in here, but I'll talk about them a little bit. This week I'm mostly focused on knitting and sewing. And so I am very excited about a lot of my sewing. I had a little run-in with the rotary cutter yesterday, which wasn't too much fun, but I've also made some really good progress on my knitting projects. I do not have any spinning this week. I still have not incorporated that back into the schedule yet. Anyway, I hope that you had a good weekend. It was hot here, and Saturday I met with a friend for coffee, and we just caught up, and it was great, and I got a lot of knitting done. And then Saturday afternoon, I just relaxed. I took a nap. It was really great. Yesterday, I had all kinds of things to do. I got up early and exercised, and then I sewed for a while. My husband and I grabbed lunch. I had a virtual book club meeting in the afternoon, and then I sewed some more, and then I had knit night last night where I knit some more. So I actually got a lot of crafting done this weekend, and it was just a really, really nice weekend. I am going into a super busy time at work. The next 4 weeks are just going to be a little bit crazy. But I am also just really excited about all the things I'm jumping into, and the crafting bug is getting me in a really big way. Quilt Guild was this past week, and so that was exciting and always inspiring, and I'm really excited about it. So let's talk about a few things. Let's share a few things. The first is the tea. Today I am drinking a second breakfast by Friday afternoon tea. It is about 11:45 in the morning. I'm doing a little bit of an early lunch, but second breakfast sounds good to me. It is Friday afternoon tea does a lot of fandom blends. That's, of course, from Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits, who always have second breakfast and elevensies and a variety of things. This one is a black tea with roasted barley, apple, ginger, and cinnamon. So it comes out black tea, kind of nutty, and just a hint of sweetness. And I am drinking that in my Carl Mountford Batman Skills mug. I got this a while ago from Society 6. It doesn't appear that they carry his artwork anymore, but Carl Mountford does some really fun illustrations with knitting. There's also one of Wonder Woman knitting, and I think there's one other, but Batman is who I have, so I'm sipping on that today. So I have progress on 2 knitting projects. The first of that is the sweater that I'm doing for Miss Roxy, my niece. That is the Cove Cardigan by Heidi May, and it is only available on Ravelry. I have that in my show notes. Also, it does not go up to the size that I needed. I really liked it, but it does not go up to the size that I needed it, so I'm kind of improvising on sizing. It goes up to either a 10 or a 10-11, and I needed it to go to a 12, so I am just kind of improvising and adding a little bit to that. Couple questions. Why would I choose a pattern that's only available on Ravelry? That was really a part of a larger problem, which is that I was looking for patterns for girls who are on the teen-tween cusp, and that look somewhat sophisticated but aren't women-sized. She's still really thin, and also I don't want to do anything that's like, not that sweaters are really that way, but I don't want to do anything that's like got a huge maturity level, but like I find that the kids stuff is very cutesy and ruffled, and she's beyond that too. And so like I'm not quite ready to jump into an extra small women's, and I'm not quite ready for child's, or I'm past child's, and it's really hard finding something that's like right in between there. Because my sister and I talked about like what chest size, like an extra small correlates to a 28-inch chest, and she's like, I think that's gonna still dwarf her. So it was kind of figuring out what all of those things are. So I am having a little bit of trouble finding good patterns for her, but I really like this one. This is a cardigan. It actually does have a little bit of extra fullness in the back, so it's a little bit ruched, and it has a beautiful lacy button band with leaves. I'll show you that in just a little bit. Otherwise, it is a top-down cardigan, so it's pretty simple. It was easy enough for me to work on. I am knitting this I'm making up my own size 12, so it's the Cove Cardigan by Heidi May, and I am knitting it in Malabrigo Rios, which is a worsted weight yarn that is superwash in the colorway Pines, and so it's this kind of blue spruce. It's green teal, and Roxy requested a teal sweater, so that was the color that I came up with. And I have separated for the sleeves, which, as you know, when you knit raglan sweaters, those last rows feel like forever because you're knitting raglan, and so you're knitting you're knitting the sleeves right into it, and so they feel super, super long, and then when you finally get to take off for the body, it's just fabulous. So I actually managed to get all the way through the raglan shaping, and I am now, I literally am just at the part where I split off, but it's starting to look a little bit like a sweater rather than like a weird thing. So that's what I've got so far, and what I wanted to show you is that the button band, at least on the left side, is this really pretty leaf lace, and so I assume you just use some of the eyelets for your buttonholes, and then the other side will have a regular button band, and so I'm really excited about this. I just have to keep knitting now, working on the body, and then eventually I'll go back and do the sleeves. The yarn is a pleasure to knit with. You can see it's a little bit, it's very tonal, and so I think it gives it a lot of depth, but also it doesn't detract from the stitches. And then the rest is just very, very plain, and I think it's going to be absolutely lovely. I hope she's going to enjoy it and get lots of wear out of it. In order to fit her body, I have gone to the Craft Yarn Council, which, as a tech editor, I deal with lots of sizing charts. In general, I find the Craft Yarn Council not to be great for, not to be perfect for women's sizing, because they really, particularly in the larger sizes, do not take into account really kind of inclusive body types. They're really using more proportional dimensions, and so sometimes I think the fitting isn't quite right. However, for the child sizes, I'm not quite as concerned by that, and so I'm kind of using that as a guide, for instance, for how long my sleeves should be, how long the body should be, and then at least on the body, I'm going to go ahead and add another inch or two to it, because my girl is tall. She is torso and legs, and she is getting really tall, and so I would really like her to be able to get more than one season out of the sweater. So I'm going to add a little bit to the arms and also to the length. So that is where I'm at with this one right now, and I plan to keep continuing. I plan to continue on, and hopefully we'll have more to show you next week, more into the body. I'm still on my first 2 balls of yarn. I am alternating skeins, which I recommend you do with pretty much any indie dyed yarn. I guess Malabrigo is not quite as indie dyed. I mean, it is kind of a commercial company, but that said, they do a lot of kettle dyeing, so they put their skeins in big kettles to dye them, and part of the reason, and that means that every skein comes out looking just a little bit different, even within the same dye batch. And so I am alternating balls 2 at a time, so every other row, so that I can kind of keep the color consistent. And so far that seems to be working. I have more skeins and I will work them in as I go throughout the process. Originally I thought I'd stop and do the sleeves, but I think I might continue to work on the body for a while and see how far I get with these. And then when it's time to start some new balls, I might start those on the sleeves. I don't know. I never really know. Sometimes I end up seeing lines. I did see a line with Miles' sweater, but that was more, it was a little less variegated. It was more kind of black charcoal gray. So I'm hoping that maybe this will hide a little bit of that. But so that is the Cove Cardigan by Heidi May. And again, I am making it in a slightly larger size. It is not linked in the show notes because I know Ravelry links are a trouble for some of you. But if you can safely use Ravelry, you can log on and check that out if you are interested. So that is the first project, and I'm really pleased with the progress I made on that. The second project is I am still working on Hiss and Vinegar, which is Casapinka's mystery knit along for over the summer. She released Clue 4 last Friday Friday. I believe there is only one more clue to be released. I am still working on clue 3 because I am still behind. There was a break between 3 and 4, but I'm still not caught up. And so this is a sample shawl. It is made with, in many cases, 3 colors. It called for 3 skeins of yarn, and Casapinka, who is Bronwyn, suggested that you choose skeins with high contrast because it would make the pattern stand out more. It is a sampler shawl. I think I said that already, with a lot of different patterns and varieties, and you're just mixing up your colors. I ended up having to add a 4th color to my shawl because one of the colors that I used, sadly, because it's like my favorite color in the shawl, I only had a half skein of, and so I've had to add more to make sure that I'm going to make it all the way through the shawl. So I am vamping because I also do not want to show you the shawl if you are mystery knitting and do not want to see it. So I will tell you now is the time that you can look away, and I will show you the progress that I've made. I believe the last time we chatted, oh, and I'm in the middle of a row, which means it's hard to show. I believe that last time we chatted, I was somewhere in this section here with the orange and the light blue. I went on and did the kind of peach and light blue section, and now I'm going back into, I'm putting a little bit of this back in, and I will be in the dark orange again. I, at this point, am kind of making up the colors as I go along, because since I have 2 color C's, I'm kind of swapping things in and out and doing different combinations. So I don't think my colors are accurate in terms of what section is what, but I am knitting the sections more or less as written, except when I make a mistake. I think on this one I made a mistake. I think I put an extra set of rows in there. But anyway, so I am more or less knitting it as written and working with the pattern as she suggests. And so I am at this point probably halfway through the shawl, and it is lovely. I'm showing it off now, and then I will tell you when it is off screen. But I am very excited about this. I really just love the way the first 3 colors go together. I like the peach in there. It's just different with the first 3. So I am working on that and continuing to do that. I also have chickens that I'm working on. I finished the first set that I was supposed to do this time. And so now I need to start the second set this evening. And so I am working on that as well. So that is kind of all the news in the knitting world of what I am working on. I have plenty of other things. Well, actually, I should say I have other things that I would like to get back to. I have a couple tops I'd like to get back to, and I would like to do a vest in the yarn that I got from Scotland. But I'm not moving too quickly on any of these other things. So I suspect this month is going to be a bit of more of the same as far as that goes. The big thing that I dug into this weekend is I dug into the quilt that I am making for my good friend Anna. She is part of my knitting group, and she had a birthday this summer, and I decided to, because a new fabric collection came out full of stationery items, and she runs the stationery blog, The Well-Appointed Desk, I decided to make her a quilt. I am making, I believe it's called the Big Pop Star, which is by Emily Dennis, and it is a star quilt with a variety of backgrounds. It's super fun. Basically, the way it creates the stars is it has you snowball corners, which means it has you sew sort of squares over rectangles in the corners and then fold them back so that you get star points, but you don't actually have to do flying geese or any of the other more complicated blocks to do those. And so this weekend, I set up all my snowball blocks. And so I did basically 160 of those. Half of them, the triangle goes one way, and half of them, the triangle goes the other way. And Saturday morning I got up and I was like, I had all my fabric cut because that's what I did last weekend. And so this weekend I was just going to sew, and I wanted to get like those first two blocks done so that now I can sew together. It's kind of complicated. I should have brought stuff to show you because it would make more sense that way. Basically, the basic block of the pattern is 4 pieces. It is a square, a big square, a small square, and then these 2 rectangular pieces that have the star points on them. So basically this weekend I did the rectangular pieces that have the star points on them. So then this coming weekend I will be ready to put together my 4-patch block, and then I will put those blocks together to create the quilt top. So basically I see this taking 2 more weekends to finish the quilt top. I hope. So this weekend, Saturday morning, I was on fire. I sat down, I put some washi tape on my sewing machine to help me get my perfect diagonal, and that helped quite a bit. So in sewing a straight line, because I think I've talked to you about how I struggle to sew a straight line. And so I worked on those pieces, and I did what's called chain piecing, which is feeding one piece in after the other. And what that does is it helps you sort of batch process things, and you don't have to stop and cut your threads every single time. So basically you sew a piece, and then you sew a few stitches kind of beyond the piece where you're not sewing any fabric, and then you slide the next one in, and then you keep doing that. And so since I had 80 that went one way and 80 that went the other way, that's how I broke them up. So I sewed 80 pieces, and that part went super smoothly. So the first part to like get set up to sewing, I had to wind thread on the bobbins, I had to thread the machine, I had to practice stitching. All of that went well, and then I just sewed those 80 right through the machine, and it was great. And then I had to cut them apart, and I have a little cutter, so I just stood there and cut them apart. Sorry, the cutter it's a rotary blade that stands up in a cutter. And so it's got these little notches where there are little parts of the rotary blade that are still available. And you basically hold your two pieces and you bring it down over the blade like this, and it just cuts right through it. So you cut those pieces apart, and then I pressed them, and I pressed the corners back, and then the last thing I had to do was trim them. And I am a person who has, I would say I have poor spatial awareness. Things do not always make sense to me, like how things are going to fit together and how I should hold something to cut it the most efficiently. And I was doing something that I shouldn't have. I was doing something completely stupid. This is totally my fault. I was cutting in a very awkward manner, and I kept thinking, this is really awkward. I don't understand why I'm doing this. But did I stop and like re-examine the situation and take a few minutes to figure it out? No, I did not. So I did what I knew I was going to do, which is I cut the wrong fabric. So I was trying to trim a section of my block, or my rectangle. I was trying to trim some excess fabric off. And what I did is I accidentally hit the fabric that I still wanted to keep on there. And I was like, oh crap, I knew that was going to happen. And then because I was like moving and because I was like, oh crap, then the rotary cutter like jumped forward and cut my finger. So that was a bit of a bummer and a bit of a stop to what I was doing. I was in such a rhythm. It was so great. So I tended to myself, and luckily I got no blood on the fabric. And so I left those alone. And then probably within 10 seconds of cutting myself, I was like, oh, I see how I could have done that and not cut myself. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that if I just flipped the block 180 degrees and cut it in a slightly different direction, it would not have been awkward and I would have been done. So I didn't go back to cutting that day because I just decided that was not it. So we went to lunch, and then when I came home, I went ahead and ran the second set of 80 rectangles through, and I sewed all of those up, I cut them apart, and then I pressed them. And so everything needs a good trim. And my hope is that I can trim it in a couple sets this week. My thing about sewing is I like to sit down when I have an hour or two and nothing kind of on either side of it, so I can just sit as long as I want and I can kind of get into the groove. And so I don't generally sew on weeknights because I just don't get into that groove. I'm making dinner, we're going over things, we're watching TV. Like I need a few hours to myself to get my brain involved, and even then it doesn't quite work. So my plan is to try and trim those things up this week just a little bit when I'm in the kitchen, when I'm waiting for water to boil or whatever else. Sorry, my sewing room is my dining room table. So when I say I can be working in the kitchen and then trimming in between, literally the dining room table is right there, so I don't have to walk very far. So I think that's going to be my plan for this week, is to trim those up so that next week I can start putting together the 4-patch blocks. So I will bring some of those once I start putting them together so that you can see what I'm doing, or I might just take a photo this morning so you can kind of see. Maybe I'll use that as the photo for this episode so you can see what I have going on. But that is kind of what I'm working towards at this point. Anyway, I believe that is all I have for you. I did not get to any spinning this week. I still am hoping to get back to spinning, but I'm trying not to aggravate my arm. And right now I am all in on sewing. I had a guild meeting this week. My boss told me, so there are a variety of quilting conventions around the country. Some of them are consumer shows, some of them are industry trade shows, and I have not gone to, well, okay. I went to H&H when I was working in the marketing for, well, more for, I should say marketing for the craft industry. I more had yarny clients, but I had a few fabric clients. I have been to H&H before, but not in the last several years, and not since I started working for Missouri Star. And then I've never been to either Quilt Market or Quilt Fest, and I have never been to QuiltCon. And I am now a member of the Modern Quilt Guild, and QuiltCon is their big show. And we talked about it a lot, actually, at the meeting on Thursday, and I thought, gosh, I would really love to go to that. But I don't think, it's in February in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I thought, I just don't know if I'm going to have enough vacation time built up by then. I don't know if I'm going to spend, because it's flight and hotel and conference registration and shopping money and maybe classes. And on Friday afternoon, my boss said, I would like to start sending you to shows. How would you feel about going to QuiltCon in February? Yes. So I'm excited that I'm going to be going, and my creative juices are flowing, and I want to sew anything and everything, and knit a bunch of stuff, and I'm feeling really creatively inspired, and that is really nice. And yes, I may be using it a little bit to ignore what's going on in the outside world. And this is not a let's all get back to our knitting. That is not it at all. But we all need a break from following the news and trying to keep up and trying to take an active part in shaping the future of our community. And so I am totally willing to delve into some crafting as part of that. So I hope that you're doing well. I hope you have a lovely week ahead. And I will say, as I always do until I see you next time, happy knitting, happy spinning, happy sewing and embroidering and any other craft. And of course, happy sipping. And I'll see you next time. Bye.